Hello and welcome to the Sky Sports F1 podcast with me, Matt Baker. To help me look back on a McLaren 1-2, some team order shenanigans and a very unhappy Max Verstappen, I'm joined by Tom McCluskey, Formula 1 content creator, and Karun Chandhok as well. Hello to both of you. Welcome. Good to see you in person. We're in the studios here at Sky. How was your weekend, Karun?
It was great watching the Grand Prix, watch it all unfold on television. It was intense watching it, let alone if you were in amongst it.
Yeah, I bet. How was your weekend? So as storylines go, in the content creation business of Formula 1,
Yep.
I think we sit here about to do this podcast going, this is all right, isn't it?
Plenty to talk about, I think. I mean, what's it going to be, 45 minutes? But I reckon, we could do double that, I think, easy today. And I'm loving the set, by the way. It's very mastermind vibes.
We've pulled out all the stops with some props and some lights.
What would be your specialist subject in mastermind?
Oh, well, we were just discussing
What, hair product, obviously.
True.
Look at it, look at it.
I'm trying to learn from the best, right?
Yeah,
You're setting the
a bit
standard.
more,
It's not quite got the volume of the Baker look.
How to volumise your hair in 3 products and less.
Nice.
Go on, what would yours be?
90s F1.
Yeah, of course. Yours?
Probably I love a pair of trainers.
Yeah, you do have a very good
I'm not
trainer
sure
going.
how that would.
What's your knowledge like on it? How you
I
make
think
a
pretty
trainer?
So I used to do a bit of buying and selling, a little, side hustle at university, trying to make a little bit of money.
Okay.
But you can spend a lot of money on shoes. And also, yours are clean.
Mine are clean, box fresh. I do try to keep a pair of box fresh.
Slammed in the comments. For your
I forgot about that. Yeah. There we go. You see that? Yeah, box fresh white shoes. No one can complain. Right, let's kick things off. We're obviously going to get into all of the big topics in a sec, but we like to do a little what I've learned on the podcast. So, Karun, kick us off. What have you learned this week in Formula 1?
I've learned you've got to be pretty thick-skinned if you want to be a race engineer.
No, that was mine.
Especially if you're Will Joseph or GP. I think I learned that Lando is much more of a team player than Sebastian Vettel or a Michael Schumacher or a Fernando Alonso. And I also learned that Daniel Ricciardo was more grumpy than I've ever seen. I've seen a whole new grumpy side of Daniel Ricciardo after the race. He was properly angry with the way the strategy played out.
Yeah. Tom, what about you?
So, I think we've learnt that Crofty very much endorses a early bedtime. But also, I think we've learnt that McLaren don't really maybe think there's a drivers' championship going on. I think they think it's already done because I think maybe their decisions would have been a bit different if that 84-point gap before the Hungarian Grand Prix, I don't know what the limit is for there to be a drivers' championship with 12 races to go. 12 divided by 84, 7, bang on, the same number of points between P1, P2. But you think if they believed in a Lando Norris championship fight, from a driver's point of view, maybe they would have kept him ahead of Oscar.
Yeah, very good. I mean, mine was very similar to yours, that I could not be a race engineer. The flack that Will Joseph, Gianpiero Lambiase took this weekend. And then I was even thinking about Bono at Silverstone and that relationship and how tense that was. And when it works, it's amazing. It's great to be a race engineer, but my goodness me, when it's not going well, these guys they're built differently. They're able to take the rough with the smooth, aren't they? So yes, there we go. All right, here's what's coming up. We're going to talk about those team orders at McLaren and what ensued after that. We're going to talk about a first win for Oscar Piastri in Formula 1. Let's not forget that the 23-year-old Australian finally fulfilled a childhood dream of winning in Formula 1. We're going to talk about why Max Verstappen had quite an uncomfortable race, and we'll also look ahead to Spa, the last race before the summer break, which I'm sure is being welcomed by a lot of people in Formula 1. Let's start by talking then about the McLaren team orders. Is it fair to say, Karun, it started at the beginning of the race, when Lando, who was on pole, lost the lead to Oscar and then also got passed by Max Verstappen? Was that where it all began? And that set up almost what we're about to discuss?
I think that's where Lando lost the race, as he said at the end. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's the 5th time, including sprints, that he's started on pole, or I don't know what we call it in the sprint, first on the grid in a sprint.
Yeah.
But he's not led at the end of the first lap. So there's something in there, I wonder. The fact that Oscar got to the front, but not only got to the front, he looked comfortable. We've seen in the past, especially last year, Oscar would get in front of Lando, but couldn't hold the pace, couldn't hold position. Think of even Abu Dhabi at the end of last year. They swapped the positions around. Oscar let Lando pass. But I thought this was a real coming-of-age race for Oscar in terms of showing his tyre management skills are right up there now, because he opened the gap. He sat there at 3 seconds, and then quite late on in the race, obviously, he had that moment, went off at turn 11. Lando got within 1.2, but then Oscar eked it back out again to 2 seconds. You know, it wasn't him, struggling for tyre wear more than the other car. He sat there comfortably, leading the Grand Prix, and just listening in on the team radio, sounded cool as ice. Just, yes, no problem, yep. It's just calm. And for me, that was, so I don't think that's where the problem started, but I think that is certainly where Oscar took the initiative in the race.
And I think the contrast to Hungary last year, because, yes, Oscar did possibly cop a bit of damage. I think he went side by side with Checo, I remember, went off track, but he really struggled race pace-wise relative to Lando last year. I think he was 15, 20 seconds or something, like a significant gap behind by the end of the race. And like you said, Karun, I think it's a time management race. It was very hot. It's kind of hard to know how much the drivers are pushing ultimately, because, I mean, was it lap 2, I think, Oscar was being told to save, basically, from McLaren. So everyone's kind of preserving as much as possible. Again, Oscar makes that tiny mistake. But otherwise, I mean, he's within 22 thousandths, I think it was, in qualifying. He's right there race pace-wise. McLaren have, they've got 2 drivers now who are right up there. Oscar's, 1.5 years into his Formula One career. And you know what? If you're going to have 2 number ones, for want of a better term, you're inviting the kind of issues that we saw yesterday. If you've got a clear 1-2, we're not having these same discussions.
Yeah, you almost forget that Oscar is only 1.5 years into his Formula One career. So, compared that with Lando, who obviously is more experienced. So, Lando ends up being in front of Oscar due to the way the pit stops worked. And so ensues this sort of series of messages that get increasingly more emotional and tense, from Will Joseph, the race engineer, to Lando Norris. Karun, as you're sort of hearing these come through, what are you thinking? Put it this way, Lando didn't look like he was going to give up that lead, did he? Until he did eventually with 2 laps to go.
Well, there were a couple of things that went through my mind. I was watching it with the live timing thing, and I went back. So the first thing that came to mind is they didn't need to create this mess. They created a mess. My personal belief. I actually wrote some notes down.
Love that.
Did some calculations there. Because when Lewis came into pit at the end of lap 40, Lando was 1.6 seconds behind Oscar. Now, they were obviously concerned about Lewis undercutting Lando, which is why they decided, as opposed to the norm, which is the lead car gets first dibs on the strategy, they flipped it around and brought Lando in first. At that point, I think 2 things could have happened. One, they actually could have just pitted both cars a lap earlier or 2 laps earlier. Oscar first, Lando second. They would have both come out comfortably ahead of Lewis, because in the end, Lando came out 5 seconds ahead of Lewis anyway. Yeah. So they could have easily come out 6-7 seconds. And then even if they had to manage the medium tyre for the first 3 laps of the stint to just bring it in gently, giving up a little bit of performance, they would have still been fine. And you could have avoided this whole mess unfolding. So that was the first thing I thought, is you didn't need to create this situation. But then, having made the decision to switch the pit stop timing round, I feel like they could have preemptively explained it to Lando in advance. It said, Lando, we're going to bring you in first, but you have to give up the position to Oscar. So it's not a conversation for afterwards. Make it clear in advance of the stop, I think.
For sure.
And maybe also this was something for either Randy Singh or for even Andrea Stella to make that call, rather than put Will Joseph in a position. Because, Will, although he is in charge now this year of the engineering group, ultimately he's Lando's guy. And as a driver, you have to feel like your engineer's on your side and is your guy and is backing you. That's so important for you psychologically, I think, as a racing driver. So to have your guy telling you have to give up the place, and in the end was basically, giving him this whole speech about how you're going to need the team and this, that, it's not, I felt for Will, because he should not have been put in that position. I felt that was someone who's not him should have been making that call. Think back, 2013, when Nico and Lewis were fighting, Ross Brawn got on the radio. Yep. We've heard when Mercedes had a similar situation with Valtteri and Lewis, It was James Vowles who got on the radio.
Yeah.
It wasn't the race engineers.
Yeah.
And I feel like in some of these instances, I think back to when Barrichello had to give up the place to Schumacher in Austria, it was Jean Todt who got on the radio. You know, don't put the race engineers in that position, because Rob Smedley had to do that for Felipe Massa at Hockenheim famously. And it's a tough position to put the race engineer in, you know, and it becomes really awkward. So to me, those were my two takeaways, is they didn't need to do it. And even if they were going to do it, it could have been done in a better way.
What did you make of the tone, Tom, of the messages? And Nico sort of made this point afterwards, like when you're dealing with drivers, a bit like you were saying, you know, you have to be clearer. It has to feel like an order as opposed to, well, I mean, what did he say? So, you know, at your earliest convenience was one of the great lines, wasn't it?
No, I'm sorry. That's just like, in that context, I feel like you need to be clear and concise. And it's like, they almost felt uncomfortable just telling Lando, like, this is an order. Like, and I think the authority that an Andrea Stella has in that team is why he maybe should have interjected. The thing is, McLaren made like you said, Karun, like a conservative call to bring him in. Hamilton gained about 5 seconds on the undercut, closed their gap from about 10 to about 5 seconds. So they were fine. They must have been very confident that Lando, because they were guaranteeing an undercut by not just leaving Oscar out for one more, but 2 more laps as well. They didn't just bring him in the lap after, they left him out for 2 more laps. They must have been very confident that Lando would just give the position back. And then you hear the radio is like, oh, we talked about this in the Sunday morning briefings, blah, blah, blah. They knew they were going into Sunday with a 1-2. They knew this was a likely, obviously Max starting P3, 4th longest run into turn 1 at Hungary, is going to be a factor. And he was a factor, and obviously had to give the position back. They knew there was a good chance it was going to be 1-2. They were going to be dealing with this. And so all of this should have been proactively and preemptively. So I'd love to know what was actually discussed in these meetings, because it almost felt like McLaren were like, oh, it's fine, we'll just be conservative because we know Lando's going to give the place back. Oh, wait, he's not giving the place back. And then instead of, I mean, Lando said after, I was always going to give it back. And which, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Listening back to it, Lando, I'm not sure about that.
They did this in Melbourne, didn't they? Because Oscar, they effectively undercut Lando with Oscar there, and then Oscar gave the place back, which I remember everyone in Australia being up in arms about him giving up a podium at his home Grand Prix. So they have done this before this year already. So it's a strategy they've done. I think it's different, though, when you're giving up a race win and when you've also now got a car capable of fighting for the championship. I don't know, what did you think? I didn't think he would give it up.
No, I think with
the way he was speaking,
the tone of it
was like he really didn't want to give it up. But again, I think for me, McLaren, it shouldn't have been this constant. They were just pestering him on the radio.
Yeah,
just be right. Your order is to give the. Like, I think they should have just swapped him. Like said, right, Lando, give the position back straight away. Then you're welcome to fight for the win.
Then you fight for the win.
Yeah,
correct.
That's the way I think. I think Lando would have been more receptive to that than this. Oh, give it back at your earliest convenience. Like, what does that mean?
And you might have fancied Lando to actually overtake Oscar.
Well, he
potentially.
did seem to have a little bit more pace.
Yeah,
Whether it would have been enough to actually get a move done, it's a difficult track to overtake. But then DRS as well.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, you know, it was a big day or big moment, I think, to work out what sort of character is Lando Norris.
Yeah.
You know, is he the Sebastian Vettel, multi-21, not listening to the radio, I'm winning this race, this is what I'm here for, or a Michael Schumacher, or even think of Fernando Alonso versus Lewis that year 2007. They think for themselves.
The example, though, I wanted to use was Verstappen in Brazil in 2022. He didn't give the position back to Perez for 6
For nothing.
Yeah.
to get a 1-2 in the constructors, of which they'd already wrapped up the constructors by that point. That's the difference, isn't it? When you compare side by side the likes of Verstappen and Norris.
And, you know, was this a moment where Lando has shown he chose to be the team player rather than the ruthless, I'm not going to use a swear word, but you know what I mean, that a Verstappen, Schumacher, Alonso, Vettel, people like that have been. And for me, this was a moment for Lando to kind of pick a stick of which one of these characters he was going to be.
But do you think, Tom, that he sort of proved that he almost took it as far as he could to be that Verstappen character, but he just in the end pulled it back? Like he actually kind of, did he prove that he's got a bit more of an edge perhaps than people initially thought?
I think that, and Lando kind of alluded to it afterwards, I think he was conflicted. He was thinking about this in his head, because otherwise you either give the position back straight away and then try and fight for a win, or you just don't. And he kind of it longed out this long. Hence why we're talking about it now, because there's this radio back and forth in a race that was actually fairly average in terms of on track.
Yeah.
Right. This radio stuff kind of made it this thing that's going to be remembered. And unfortunately, it's taken the shine off of Oscar's maiden win as well, which I do feel for Oscar in that. But look, McLaren, Lando and Oscar is something for the future, okay? Ferrari's pairing is changing, Mercedes pairing is changing. To try and make that work long term, when you do have two drivers, like Oscar, I think has really caught up to Lando. In qualifying, there's barely anything in it. Still a little bit. I think Lando does slightly carry an advantage still, as he should with the years of experience he has over Oscar. But this is, for Lando to just act selfishly in that moment and take the win, he does have to think, okay, if I do that in this moment, maybe later on down the line, maybe Max starts to struggle, maybe that gap starts to get closer. And if he doesn't give Oscar this now, Oscar might not be inclined to help Lando out later down the line. The team might not be inclined either.
And I think what is worth remembering, of course, is, you know, Oscar is managed by Mark Webber, who's at the receiving end of the team audio saying in Multi 21.
Yeah.
And I think it was really important for McLaren to show that they were going to be fair to Oscar and they were going to back Oscar, because they don't want to upset Oscar to the point where he will go off to Mercedes or Red Bull or Ferrari or somewhere else. Honestly, you know, they've got a fantastic driver lineup. And I think they need to keep both drivers in there. So, yeah, for me, the whole thing could have been dealt with in a way that it didn't become this whole public mess. Pit them both 2 laps early, pit them in the same order, bring the tyres in gently, bosh, keep the 1-2.
Is there any example of a top team having 2 number ones and
it working
and it being able to manage it without it overflowing? Because you're gonna get these pinch points, you're going to get these tough moments where the team's going to have to make a call. Again, 84 points, probably too big a gap to justify. If it was 24 points, I think it would have been, Oscar wouldn't have liked it, but I think he could respect and understand why McLaren would be like, look, give the position to Max. I'm sorry this is your first ever win, because we don't know how much that plays into it as well. If Lando's like, Oscar's already won a race, if this is Oscar's second win, maybe he's like, there's all these tiny little, and again, McLaren playing to the emotion in that moment. I think he was just so conflicted, and I think he basically just. I think my opinion is that he just decided basically on like 3 laps to the end that okay, I'm going to give it back.
I think to your point, there've been more examples of 2 number ones falling out than staying together. You know, I can think of a few. You think of Hill and Villeneuve at Williams for the championship. Go back further, Prost and Lauda finished half a point apart, got on very well. But there's certainly more examples of them falling out than being harmonious.
One of the interesting things I thought post-race was and I don't know how intentional it was, but the PR drive from Andrea Stella, which I thought he answered all the questions perfectly. You know, would you put yourself in his shoes? Would you expect Lando to give a place up? He's on track for his second Formula One win. As a team principal, he was actually heartened, inverted commas, to see Lando not give it up. Because that's not what you want from a driver. Drivers are not going to give up wins, are they?
They clearly did expect him to give it up, because otherwise they wouldn't have made this super conservative call.
Yeah.
Because they didn't need it. It's not like, it was like tight for Lewis and Lando. And like obviously I know Lewis had his foray with Max, which obviously delayed him, and he ended up like 20 seconds down the road from the McLarens. But like, they must have thought, Lando will just give it back. Otherwise, they wouldn't have manufactured this position themselves. Like they're the ones responsible for creating this position.
They had a 3-second buffer and an offset, you know, of
5 laps.
5 laps on the tyres. And you know, I think he said afterwards he didn't want to put pressure on the pit crew, which is why they didn't want to make it too tight. I was like, okay, but all you got to do is tell the pit crew, give up a second even and pit a lap earlier. Because that's what Lewis was catching them, was, as Tommo said, was a second a lap. So if you don't want to put the pressure on them, then you just pit a lap earlier and give them an extra second. That's all they actually need. These people do fantastic pit stops thousands of times a year in practice and in the races. So, Yeah.
We saw it at Silverstone, didn't we? They didn't want a double stack.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a superstition or something.
But again, I did wonder why they didn't bring Oscar in straight after. So Lando came out on lap 46, Oscar came out on lap 48. So he didn't actually come straight into the pits. And, well, you look at, Oscar was 2 seconds ahead before, about 1.5, 2 seconds ahead, came out 2.5 behind. So if he'd have lapped, they would have been like close on track. Maybe that's what McLaren wanted to avoid. But then again, if they thought Lando was always going to give the position back, then, well, they must have done.
Well, there was some explanation around, they were concerned about Max, because Max had a much bigger tyre offset to the others in the middle stint, and whether he would come at them. But again, I don't fully buy that. I tell you what was a bit awkward was Andrea Stella nodding along to Nico's lecture. Nico's sort of like telling him.
He's speaking from experience.
And Andrea's just sort of standing there nodding his head along. That was a bit...
Nico not pulling any punches.
No,
was
he wasn't.
But he's been on that side.
He's got the authority.
No,
He's got more than anyone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I thought Nico did a great job in the post-race interviews, actually, going in there straight away, asking them the questions. I thought he did a really good job asking the questions.
Yeah. Final point then on this sort of team orders side of McLaren 1-2. Let's play devil's advocate. We get to Abu Dhabi. Lando finishes 7 points behind Max. How much would McLaren regret this weekend?
Deeply.
Yeah.
I mean, but then
they'll look at other races, and there's been plenty of times that Lando should have really won in Canada, should have really won in Silverstone,
Spain
should have really won in Austria, Spain as well. Like
exactly
for sure. Yeah, if it comes down to like less than 7 points, of course, right? And that would take it's doable. I mean, when Kimi Räikkönen won in when he won in 2007, he was like with 2 races to go, he was quite a bit back, and then just kind of came through last minute. So it can happen. I mean, it's mathematically possible. Improbable, not impossible. But I mean, this is one of, I think, a few missed opportunities.
But I think Thomas made the right point here, which is it's almost like they don't think they can win the Drivers' Championship.
Or at least maybe, I don't know, like Andrea Stella talks a lot about, it's the team. He's really on it about, like, everyone's working, not just the drivers, everyone has to be on board with this project. I think, say Red Bull are in the situation with Max and Checo that McLaren are in terms of, you just swap the teams around. Do I think Red Bull go into that race being like, right, if Checo's ahead and he deserves it, he takes the win? No, I think they say Max is closer. It's still 84 points before the race, but it's now a 76-point gap. It could be a 69-point gap. I think Red Bull prioritise Max in that decision-making. I think there's a lot of talk about culture in teams.
But I'm not sure that's a fair comparison, because Red Bull is very much geared around Max. I think I think you almost need to compare Mercedes and McLaren, where they are more sort of equal status at the moment. I think the point around Andrea Stella talking about the team has come into play here. So yes, if he loses the championship by 7 points, of course they'll regret it. But I think he is very much thinking about this wider team, and that includes Oscar, because the confidence boost Oscar's going to take from bossing that race, because he did for all the way until that lap 45 stop, he was in command of that race, and the confidence he will take out of that, and the monkey off his back of having that first race win, I think is something that Andrea Stella's looked at the upside of.
Yeah, and look, I think Lando, you can argue he lost 7 points here, right, in a Drivers' Championship fight. But again, I think that's in this race in isolation, perhaps. But then I think when you look at the broader scheme of things, and in the moment, in that reaction, I was like, Lando, it's not worth it. It's not worth holding on to it when the team is so adamant, like, you have to give the position back, and we will be fuming and we'll be really disappointed in you. Like, it's long-term gains for potential short-term loss, So I think it probably will all work out in the end. But I don't think this will be the last time that there's a pinch point.
I don't think it will. Let's just touch on Oscar winning, because let's not forget, this is a guy who's come from Australia, has made huge sacrifices in his career, hasn't he? And he's now won a Formula One race. He's a Formula One race winner. Not many people get to say that in the world. You sort of mentioned it earlier. Did it take the shine off, do you think, from Oscar's win?
I think it did. I think, there's so many people, so many people down the pub or the supermarket, right, who think, they only won because Lando gave it up. Yeah. And that's just not true, because, the nuances of how an undercut works and how the effect of new tyres on an out lap for those 2 laps and all that stuff is lost on most fans out there. You know, most fans look at it quite simplistically and say, well, he pitted, he was in front, and he gave up the place. So, you know, that's been handed to him.
It's complicated.
And I think it is a bit unfair on Oscar. But I think what is good is that everyone within the sport, and most importantly, Oscar himself, understands that if the pit stops had happened the other way around, he would have won that race. And that's why I come back to the point that for him, psychologically, this will be a massive boost because he won that race off the start and controlled it from the front.
There was I don't know if you've seen his video. I think you reposted it on Twitter yesterday evening.
Yeah.
Posted this video of him just kind of almost, because I thought he sounded quite underwhelmed. And I know that's his character. I know he's a very chill guy. I equated, when I was first listening to his team radio after he won, it sounded like a pilot thanking his cabin crew. You know, as you come into land, you know, thank you everyone for your hard work. We'll be landing shortly. It was so calm and collected and measured. And I almost think maybe Mark Webber or someone on his team said, I think you should do a video just to really go, oh, I'm actually really grateful for all the support. Or maybe just to kind of bolster it up a bit. I don't know.
Well, but he said it, you know, it took a while to sink in.
Yeah.
Everyone's different, right? I've seen a clip of Oscar when he won his first F2 race, and he still wasn't going crazy because that's not in his nature, but he was much more kind of, like gassed on the radio about it. So, yeah, look, I think that, again, to your point, Karun, I think that he did earn it. Even at the end, when people could say, oh, Lando opened a 6-second gap or whatever. Yeah, but Lando was pushing like crazy because he wanted to like make a point, or for whatever reason, he was pushing a lot more.
He was trying to make a point.
Yeah,
100%.
And Oscar, I don't like. Why would Oscar be? Like he wasn't doing that because he was believing that the team would let. So even that gap is like you can doubt whether that gap is actually measurable and important or not. But yeah, he's like the progress he's made. I think that measured, calm, kind of like his countryman Daniel Ricciardo. Actually, Ricciardo's very calm and composed on the radio. I know Yuki's talked a lot about that as being something he's really learned from Daniel, and the way that Oscar goes about himself at such a young age as well. I mean, you know, you've been in an F1 car crew, and that must be. Like, there's not many drivers who come along and are able to just be so measured and diligent and don't let their emotions creep in and affect them.
He's horrendously impressive.
Yeah,
I remember saying it last year, you know, looked at his previous F2 record. I remember speaking with some of the people who worked with him in junior category who said they thought he was better than Leclerc, and, you know, he really is the real deal.
I remember that quote,
He's the real deal. And, you know, it shows it was worth the fight, wasn't it? The contract battle, which seems a very long time. Well, it was 2 years ago, wasn't it? It kicked off in Budapest 2 years ago. In fact, it was today. It was the Tuesday after Budapest 2 years ago that it kicked off. And it was worth the battle for McLaren to get him.
Yeah, they haven't looked back since, have they? This is a perfect segue to talk about someone who is less calm and collected in the car, or certainly was this weekend, and that's Max Verstappen. And perhaps we should start, when we talk about Red Bull, let's start by talking about McLaren, because is it fair to say, Karun, that the McLaren is now, we've gone to Silverstone, we've gone to Hungary, it's the quickest car, isn't it, on the grid at the moment?
It was the quickest car in Hungary. I don't know if it'll be the quickest car in Spa, because Spa is a circuit which historically has suited the Red Bulls so well. They're a very efficient car. They're able to produce very efficient downforce. Now, the McLaren, between last year and this year, has improved significantly in that respect. And when we get to Spa, it's a very different downforce configuration and package to what we saw in Budapest, diametrically opposite, in fact. So I think that Spa, let's see what the weather does first of all, but assuming it's dry, I think it will theoretically favour Red Bull a bit more. But what we can say is across the range of circuits we have in F1, there's no doubt the McLaren is at least a match for the Red Bull across a range of, let's say, 4 or 5 circuits. Yeah.
What did you make then of Max's comments, Tommo, over the radio, and what did you make of it for poor GP who had to be on the receiving end?
Look, I think they've been since 2016 when he jumped in that Red Bull in Spain and took that win. They've been working together. So, you know, Max and GP have a relationship that none of us can they understand each other more than anyone else, right? Outside of their lives in terms of that racing context. So this isn't unusual. It's not unusual for GP to kind of sass Max back a little bit. I think this is a product of Max Verstappen. And it must be tough for him to accept that, for a long period of time now, he's had this package, this car that he's been really comfortable in and being able to extract. And even though, it's always struggled to ride the curbs, that's never been really exposed like it has been now because everyone else was so far behind. To be in that position and to really be commanding it, and again, at the start of this season, to now see everyone else catching up and these mistakes start to creep in, it's a human thing, right? Strategy, these cars being developed, choices on setup, etc., etc. People are going to make mistakes. It happens, and they're going to get more exposed now because of how close it is. That must be really hard for him to accept, and I think that's the frustration that's boiling over. I think this was the angriest we've seen Max on the radio for a long time.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is how his communication is quite angry and can be quite aggressive, and GP knows how to manage that, and they understand each other. I remember Martin doing a sit down with Lewis years ago, and people criticised Lewis for being quite down on the radio sometimes and being like, oh, what's almost quite giving up. But Bono knows that that's just how Lewis expresses himself in those moments, and I'm sure Karun, you as a driver, you expressed yourself in certain ways, and it's that understanding with your race engineer that's more important than us from the outside looking in and being like, Max bad for getting angry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think there's more to it.
I think there was a deep-rooted frustration that they didn't have a car quick enough to win, but they certainly had a car quick enough to be third. They had a quicker car than Mercedes, quicker car than Ferrari, right? So he should have finished third. So I think he was annoyed that on a weekend where they were, third was the best they could do. I think if they'd just done a normal strategy and finished third, he'd have been fine. Mm-hmm. I think the fact that they, tried to extend the stints and create a tyre offset at Lewis, effectively giving up track position and putting Max in a position to try and get it back on track, I think he felt like he was being forced to do more work in order to get back to just third place anyway. It wasn't like they were trying to roll the dice to do something to win, because that was never going to happen. They weren't quick enough to win. So I think that was the underlying thing, is he was in, and you're in the cockpit. You haven't got a holistic view of the race. You've got a very myopic view of what's happening, and all you're seeing is, we're only quick enough for third. Let's just do the same as the other two cars in front, and we'll be third. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh God, they've put me in a position. I'm in the dirty air. I'm being forced to fight these people and forced to overtake just to get back to where I was in the first place. So I think this created this sense of frustration. Now, I personally don't think it justifies the level of rage and the level of, anger that was directed towards GP. And I felt that I did feel for GP because, at the end of the day, it is a team sport, and those engineers work incredibly hard to support you. And there are
such a big team, isn't it? It's not just those people on the pit wall.
And you need them on site. When you're having a bad day as a driver, and I get it, Max doesn't have very many bad days, but there will be times where you're having a bad day, and they don't berate you for that. And the same way, if they've got something wrong, for them to face the incoming, that's not nice for them to hear.
It's almost kind of like a double-edged sword, because Max has, again, this isn't the first time he's got, wound up on the radio, and I think in that instance in Hungary, I think the strength of his emotion, I think that did inhibit his performance. That's my opinion. I know he was asked about it after by Rachel, when he was like, no, but I mean, I think when he was seemingly so wound up, I think that's going to affect anyone in anything they're doing in life. But I think also it's that strength of passion and character, and like that absolute determination, like anything less than perfection, he's not happy, is what has got him to where he is, and where he almost won 20 races in a row, right, with that one little blip in Singapore. So it's kind of, Red Bull know who Max is, and yes, it would have been, you can tell, like, GP was frustrated at Max. He wasn't entertaining it at some point. And it's hard. Like when Max is that level of character and that level of personality in the cockpit in those touch point moments when, you know, again, this is for third place, but he's been so used to winning, and now it's not quite there. That must be, to go from that point and then to be seeing everyone else catch up and maybe overtake you in a car battle that, you know, Max has limited, you know, impact on that. He turns the wheel, but he doesn't develop the car. I can understand the frustration, but also he definitely crossed a line where I think it hurt his performance.
Maybe I should have just told him that his sim racing car won the race. That would have cheered him up.
Nothing wrong with a bit of IRA.
We haven't mentioned that yet.
A bit of IRA. Team Redline would love that. So, yeah, it was, you know...
They did, didn't they? I made that up. No, I'm sure I read somewhere that the car that he drove overnight won the 24 hour race.
Probably. Well, yeah, I mean, I've spoken with Atze Kirchhoff, who runs Redline, Max's team, and yeah, Max is always, when there's a red flag, he'll be on their WhatsApp group, like checking in on the team and working on setups. He loves it. That is just such a passion for him.
Yeah.
He does it so much, and even, you know, he can be one of the, he is one of the best in the world on a sim.
I know.
Like, which is, because it's a very different skill set in many ways, but he's one of the best in the world in both.
Really quite impressive. Final point on Max. Stewards ruled no further action on the incident with Lewis Hamilton. Karun, surprise? I mean, they said no driver was predominantly to blame for the crash. Do you think that's fair?
I think so. I think so. I think, you know, the way it played out, obviously, I think it was Williams, wasn't it? They were lapping, and then Lewis went back to the racing line. Lewis definitely turned in earlier than the conventional line because he was going to defend. And it was at the point that Max had jumped on the brakes. And then as soon as Max put a bit of steering lock on, he locked the fronts, slid into Lewis. I think it's fair. I think it was a racing incident.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, I think, honestly, at first look, I was like, ooh, I think that was a bit naughty from Max, because he was coming in it was a big dive bomb. But like you said, I think understanding why he locked up and looking at Lewis's drive steering inputs as well, the whole, like, could Lewis have done more to avoid it, is the whole kind of thing around it. And you look back at Lando with Max, but then Lando would have had to go technically off track onto the curb to avoid Max. So whereas Lewis could have got out of it a little bit, Max would have gone straight and then probably undercut him. So in hindsight, yeah, I probably agree as well.
Okay, good. Final sort of bit of the podcast, really, looking ahead to Spa. You mentioned it earlier when you actually were just saying that Max almost won 20 races in a row. And we have to remind ourselves, we've got 7 different winners now in this Formula One season. Could we get an 8th in Spa, is my question to you. Could it be, and I'm sort of saying this loosely because we know what a torrid time Sergio Perez has had, maybe he's got one race left to prove himself. My goodness me, if he was able to put a performance together in Spa,
I'd love to see it.
Could just about save his seat.
I'd love to see it, because it's been tough viewing, hasn't it? Like seeing Checo struggle as much as he has been.
Yeah, and he's been quite open in interviews now. I think he can't
can't
deny the narrative, can you? You have to
Yeah.
accept it and almost embrace it.
And I know you mentioned earlier about Daniel, Karun. I think part of the reason Daniel was so frustrated that the team kind of let him down was because Checo has left the door open. Like, there is clearly an opportunity, and Daniel wants to. That's the only reason he's back in it. That's the only reason he's in Racing Bulls, because he wants that Red Bull seat. So, yeah, I think it's a big weekend for Checo. But I mean, even if he gets a podium, like the collective of this season so far, he's dropped now to P7 in the Drivers' Championship behind Lewis Hamilton now. He's only, I don't think it's like 6-7 points ahead of George Russell. I don't know if one good weekend in Spa is really going to make much of a difference to how he's being considered by Red Bull in these chats that they're going to have in the mid-season break.
Well, I got myself into a world of trouble at Goodwood at the
Yes,
Festival
you did.
Speed. Well, actually, I'm going to rephrase that. I didn't.
Yeah. The narrative got changed on social media.
Somebody who chose 8 seconds out of a 7-minute clip, where my exact words were, who'd like to see Max and Daniel teammates in the RACTT, which, by the way, is a race for cars built before 1966 at Goodwood Revival. They conveniently cut it at the point where I went in the RACTT, which is bonkers. So I feel like I should stay out of this now.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
That's not true. Listen, I agree with everything Tommo said. I think it's been tough viewing. Watching Checo crash in Q1, was you just felt sorry for him. You know, nobody wants to see that, and it's a guy trying to fight for his career, and I felt really sorry for him in that shunt. But Spa, as I was saying before, is a track that should suit Red Bull. You know, historically, it's a track that should suit him. The trouble is the weather is so unpredictable. You think we saw George Russell in a Williams qualify in the front row, didn't we, a few years ago in the wet? You could see some pretty crazy stuff happen at Spa with the weather. So that I think, as ever, will be the overriding narrative of the weekend, is what happens with the weather.
Also, I think one more point on Checo is that, do you actually think that if he was to be dropped mid-season, that gives him at least a chance to, there's an Alpine seat going, a Williams seat going. I think Williams would be a really good fit for Checo. Obviously, he brings a lot of financial backing with him.
Be the ex-Red Bull,
the Red Bull dropouts. Yeah, exactly.
So would do potentially. I mean, Alex has done really well.
Well, exactly. He's been able to, and that's the thing, right? Checo, he's not been able to showcase his best in that Red Bull, but in 2020 he was one of the drivers of the season. He got that seat on merit over Alex. It was the right decision to take Checo, and ultimately he did enough. Yes, he wasn't that close to Max in 21, but he did enough in those moments to help him get that title. And I almost worry, like, if they don't replace him, I don't see this turning around, because everyone's kind of caught up. I've got no logic to go to be like, oh, I think Checo's going to turn it around in Baku or in like wherever. So is it almost more benefit, if he wants to continue in Formula One, for him to get dropped now, so he could potentially get a seat, rather than waiting to the end of the year, and then I don't think things are going to massively improve. Red Bull possibly lose the constructors and then getting dropped. Like, what's the preference?
Not being dropped, I think. You don't ever want to be dropped. I think that just creates it's a bad place to be in, to try and get a seat back.
But then get dropped now and get a seat elsewhere, or get dropped at the end of the year and probably be out of the seat and maybe the sport entirely.
But it's not mutually exclusive. You could go and talk to a team about a seat for next year and still see out the season.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. I think that they're actually two separate points. It doesn't just because he stays to Abu Dhabi.
But he wants to finish his career at Red Bull. He said this so many times. He really wants to finish his career at Red Bull. But then what else would he say?
What else is he going to say? He's a Red Bull driver. Of course he's going to say that.
I want to drive a Ferrari, but
Do you?
You want to finish your career?
Yeah, I want to finish my career at Ferrari. It just feels appropriate. Look, final race before the summer break. So I think it's very exciting. I think if we look at where Formula One is now, it's in a great.
Well,
this is a mouth-watering second half of the season, isn't it? After the summer break, if we're going to keep going like we are at the moment.
I've been banging on about this for 6 months. I've written columns. I've said it on our broadcast, all sorts. The rule cycle needs to be 6 years.
Yeah.
3 years to allow people to catch up. 3 years of great competition. Then you could change the rules. So, I think we've got a brilliant next 18 months coming up. Let's enjoy it. There's going to be a great competition. And then, 2026 will be what it'll be.
Certainly. All right, just time to tell you then about what's coming up this weekend. As I mentioned, the Belgian Grand Prix live across Sky Sports. We've also got F1, we've got F1 of course, but we've got F2 and F3 as well. So Friday, FP1 kicks off at 12:30. You can join us from midday. FP2, 3:45 on air for a session start at 4 p.m. Saturday, FP3, 11:30 before qualifying. Build-up starts at 2:15 for a session start at 3 o'clock. Finally, Sunday, on air at 12:30 for a race start of 2 o'clock. Where are you going to be watching Belgium? Are you there?
I will be at race control in the commentary box.
Very good. Very good. Bring your brolly.
Well, the race control is indoors, so I'll be fine. It'll be Ted who'll need a brolly.
Ted will need a brolly, yes. And you'll be...
sofa at home with a dog and a wife. A few snacks.
Perfect way to watch F1.
Love it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you both very much for joining me on this week's podcast. We're going to be back next Tuesday. We'll look back at the Belgian Grand Prix as normal. Hope you can join us then. Bye for now.